Hello, my name's David Barnes, and you join me in my office in Colchester on this beautiful winter's day where we're going to talk about your favourite subject, GDPR. So, when I first heard about GDPR, I looked it up in Google because I hadn't heard of it before, and the hits that came back was the Grateful Dread radio station in Baltimore. So, imagine my disappointment when I found out actually that's not the GDPR that everyone's talking about. So, this is the real GDPR, but the purpose of what we're talking about today is not to go through the theory because you know it already. You've heard it a million times from different people. We've actually got an approach which works. We've been using it in a number of different companies, and I'm going to share it with you now. It's a very simple method, and it's something which you yourselves, probably the majority of people on this webcast, will actually be able to say, you know what, we can do this, we can apply this method. We don't need any external training. We can actually get on and do this ourselves. And if that's the case, fantastic. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing today. So let's get started. So this is the agenda that we're going to go through. We're going to start off by seeing what does good look like? What do we expect from GDPR? Then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking through the method, and we'll keep coming back to this because the main part we're going to be doing is the let's do it part. Enough theory, show me how to actually do it. And then at the end, the simple steps that you can do to get started yourself. So for the purpose of this webcast, I'm going to be using this tool, which is elements.cloud. You've probably got your own tool already, in which case that's fine because the important thing here is the approach and the thinking behind how to do this. For those of you who haven't got as far as using an application, then I definitely recommend you check out elements.cloud. A lot of the functionality is free and very low cost, and it's specifically tailored for helping with GDPR, as you will see. So what does good look like? This is the ideal situation for what we want to arrive at. So in terms of our data, our process, and our people, the first four here I think you would know already. You need to know what your data is, how the fields are classified, have actions in place to progress any gaps, and to be able to justify holding personal data. This is stuff you know already. Then what we're promoting is a model around ownership of data, and a piece that companies really struggle with at the moment is the linkage between the data that they have and the way that people work. Do you understand how that works today? A lot of companies really struggle with this. Then on the process side, it's important that we can really clearly articulate these are the processes that we have that create, update, remove, or even just use personal data. Those processes need to be managed, so we need ownership of those processes to make sure that we do process change well. And then on the people side, so people will have actions to be compliant, to mitigate risks. And the opposite to the data, we need to understand the relationship between the way people work and the data that they use. And people need to be able to easily find the way that they're meant to work so that they can do it in a way that's compliant with GDPR and they're not abusing the use of personal data. So the point of the webcast today is to look at an approach which covers all of these points. And how we're going to do that is with reference to this method. So this is a method which we've called the GDPR method. It starts with the need to be compliant with GDPR, and it goes all the way through a number of steps, which comes out at the other end where we have a sustainable approach in place. So how does this work? Actually, the first three steps you know already. It's the stuff that you read in every handbook. It's around having an information audit to map the data flows, creating an information asset register, and identifying the lawful basis for processing data. So I'm not going to bore you with repeating all of this stuff. I'm actually going to show you a way that we will do this. And you'll see that each of these also result in potential actions being raised, and it could be as a result of risks that have been identified, or just other things that need to be done to classify and justify the use of data. After this point, we're going to talk through process ownership, how we can associate data with our flows, validation of that information, and then finally communication to users and the continuous improvement piece. So we'll keep coming back to this model as we go through. So back to the start, we'll go to the data flows part, and we've got a very simple yet very powerful method for how we do this. And this is a example company here called Blue Chip. And typically all organizations we work with have this type of view of their organization, to have everything on one page. This is what they do. So they have their value chain processes for how they deliver value to their customers and a number of supporting processes. So we're going to look at an example today, which is hire to retire, because this is quite relevant to GDPR. And inside hire to retire, you'll see a number of different steps around managing people, recruiting, developing competence, etc. And we're going to break it down and go into the recruitment part. So this is a data flow that we've already mapped. So it starts with a budget for approved open positions, and it follows the flow of the data all the way through different activities until we get to the point where the vacancy has been filled. Now, it's a really simple method to understand, and in fact, the simplicity is very important because we need people in the business to be able to buy into this and to be able to understand it without having to learn 257 different types of squiggly line that have different meanings. So there are only 4 things that people need to understand about this. There's the what, the when, the why, and the who. So for example, the what, we load CV data into candidate database. When do you do it? When you have candidate CVs data received. And why do you do it? What's the success criteria? How do you know when it's done? When essential candidate information is accessible. So that's the scope of this part of the process. And who is doing it? Well, it's HR admin, and they're using the people HR system. So this is an essential building block to construct this flow. And you can see as well that there are these paper clips, and what these allow you to do is to specify how you do the task. So how do I create a job spec? Well, actually there's a template already, and there's a good example, so people can easily get access to the information they need. Alternatively, it could be a lower level of process detail. What we've also done here is included the data coming in. So we've got CV data coming in here. We've got additional data coming into the interview and background checks and for payroll. You may be thinking right now, some of you prefer swim lanes. You can map this as a swim lane. Personally, in a lot of the big companies we've worked in, we tend to go for this approach because in fact the swim lane is underneath the activity, and we put the what we call the resource on last, which means that we're really very much focused on the end-to-end flow of the process, and we're not thinking about who's processing the data, we're just thinking about the journey of the data itself. And the other thing is around decisions. So you may think, well, our processes are very complicated, we need to have decisions. That's fine as well. You can see an example of a decision here. Select candidate and make offer. So the pretend it works scenario is the position is accepted and the start date is agreed. Happy days. But what happens if something goes wrong? Well, here we have an offer rejected. So there's another alternative process going on. So in a way, this select candidate activity is actually a decision. Has the candidate accepted, yes or no? It's just a little bit more in human language. The other thing that's really important, whatever tool you're using, is to make sure that these processes are not mapped in isolation, because the data flow doesn't stop here, it goes on. And you can see at this point, we're actually flowing to another process called develop employee competence. But we're going to stick here within HR today. And you'll remember in the method I showed you just now, we have the possibility of raising risks, and that's the whole idea of mapping this, is first of all to understand the flow of the data. We can identify the data sources, but then look at the risks. So as an example, I'm going to say there's a risk here with organizing and holding interviews, because what's happening is that data is being recorded, but it's just being emailed around as plain text. So I'm going to add a risk to this activity. So I need to give this a title. So this is personal data not being managed properly. So I could put the risk description about it being emailed around, etc. Likelihood, it needs me to put one. So I'm going to say data being emailed and not stored correctly. So the likelihood, this is, well, we know it's happening, so it's very likely. The impact could be high if it gets into the wrong hands. And the risk owner, I'm going to assign one of my colleagues, and the risk status is raised. And all this data is configurable. I've just set this up for a demonstration. So we add the record. So that is now added into the system. So then it's possible actually to report this by creating a report and having a report of all the risks across all my processes, which I can display on the screen and I can export to Excel. But because we're very limited on time, I'm not going to do that at the moment. So back to the method. So what we've done so far is we've looked at how we map the data flows. The next part is about the information asset register, because we need to be able to look at our data and classify it. And so how we do that using the elements tool is using something called a reference model. So here we've got a number of reference models set up. So we've got one for our people HR system. This is our Pardot Marketing Excellence and our Salesforce CRM. We've also got some reference models that are to do with some other regulations, to do with some financial controls and a quality management system, but that's not within scope for today. So we're going to look at people HR. And when I open up people HR, it gives me a hierarchical list of all the objects that are in the system. And if I look at candidates, this then breaks down into a number of different fields. So if we take, for example, the first name, we can see if I go to the GDPR tab, this has already been classified by personal data. It was classified by myself, and I did it yesterday. And if I wanted to get someone to assist with this, I can actually invite someone to collaborate. So I'm going to ask my colleague Victor, please can you check my classification? So Victor will receive an email and he'll be able to sign in here, have a look, he'll be able to respond, and we can have a discussion until I've marked it as resolved. Alternatively, I might even just go ahead and raise an action. So I'm going to do that now and make this a little bit more formal so we can track it. So the action is to confirm classification of, in this case, it's the first name, and I'm going to make the owner one of my colleagues. And I'm going to be very generous. I'm going to give her until the end of the year to do that. So we're going to set the status as open for the moment. So as before, all these actions are logged. We can see who the action owners are, the dates that they're due, and we can report those off very easily. So actually also what we're going to do is to add another field now. So we've got candidates for job positions. The one that we're missing is the ethnic group, which is obviously quite sensitive. So we know that this is a text field. It's also a list within the system. So when I add that in here it is as ethnic group. So now what I can do is do the assessments, and I'm going to say that this is personal data, special personal data in fact, and the reason is contains highly confidential data. Now that has been classified. So what that means, if we go back now to our method, we've got the information asset register. So we've got the opportunity to capture all of the fields and then classify them. And if there are any issues, we can then raise actions. The next part is around the lawful basis for processing that data. So let's have a look at that. So going back to the one I just did, the ethnic group, you'll see that when you set it to special personal data, you then get the option of setting a retention period, which could be for a number of years and months. And then having the legal basis. Why do we need to have this? And yeah, this is a really good question. Maybe we don't need it. Maybe I should raise an action to investigate whether we need it and whether we can remove the field. But just for the sake of what we're doing now, I'm going to say that this is required as part of our employee contract. we'll say that it needs to be, so let's put that there. It needs to be encrypted, and we can also add sources of data for where this comes from and what we do with it as well. Now, what's really nice about this is that when I return to the list of the reference models and I click on People HR, there's a GDPR tab, so I can actually see a status of how we're doing so far. So at the moment in Blue Chip, actually 57% of the data that we store in People HR is considered to be personal data. We've still got 14% which hasn't been assessed yet. So this is quite interesting. And I can also see a breakdown at the moment of the reason for holding that data. So the vast majority is to do with the contract. And again, there's a whole load that hasn't yet been assessed. So it gives a real insight into that information. So back to our method. We've now got to the part where we've got a lawful basis in place for processing the data. So the next part is to assign owners, because at this point, we can't go any further unless we're actually going to make this happen now in the business. So we need people in the business to help us to ensure ways of working are compliant and efficient. And just to talk through that just for a second, you can follow the PDCA cycle for this. So this is plan, do, check, act, or as I was once told in Toyota, plan, delay, cancel, apologize. So the owner's responsibilities are around making sure we've got really well documented process flows. I call them ways of working. Make sure they're compliant, make sure that people in the business are trained, and then proactively monitor to make sure they're being followed, the performance is good, ask for users to feedback on improvement ideas, and then to prioritize what we can actually do. So this is a continuous improvement loop. And this is something which is used in some big companies, small companies. This is standard best practice for process excellence, for making sure you're working in an efficient and compliant way. And it's particularly relevant when you have got regulations that need to be applied. So let's go back to our method. So once we've got the owners assigned, the owners can then do two things. They can start to look at the data objects and understand how they link to the ways of working. So let's show you how we do this. So as an example, if we take the one we were doing just now, ethnic group. So I'm going to go to attachments. So I'm going to copy the link. And in the Blue Chip map, I'm going to say, just for argument's sake, that this one is actually captured during the interview stage. So I'm going to add attachment, reference model node. There it is. So I'm going to say captured during interview. So this is really powerful what we're doing here, because we're actually creating a link between the data and the process flows. And I know of very few companies who've successfully managed to do this, because honestly it's hard work. So you definitely need a tool that's going to help you to do that. So now when I click on the paperclip, I can see here that in this process, we're looking at recruit, source and select employees. We have an activity called organize and hold interviews. We have some risks, and we also have some links to data. So you can imagine a whole load of other data fields would be listed here as well. And the great thing is, if I go back to the reference model, then this happens this way around also. So you'll see here, there we go, that the ethnic group is linked to this activity, organize and hold interviews. So when I click on it, it tells me the diagram and it gives me the link description, and I can then go and explore further. So this is a two-way match between the data and the ways of working. So these are now inextricably linked, and for the first time in the history of Blue Chip, we actually have full transparency of how our data fits in with our processes. We also need to design data control processes. So I'm going to show you an example of that now as well. If we go into back to the top of our model, so you remember this is the one pager, and we're going to look at here data management and governance. So here we've got some examples of some processes for what happens if someone wants to rectify the data, and there's an erasure request, or there's a data breach. And what I can do is drill down into the detail of here. And guess what? It's the same approach. We have the what, the when, the why, and the who. And the how is either another level of process detail or it's an attachment. So in our method here, we now get to the stage where we've mapped our processes and we know how we're going to control our data. So now this needs to be validated. And when you look at a particular diagram, so if we go back to where we were before, let's go to the top of my process. So we'll go back down into the hire to retire recruitment process again. And if I open up the right panel, we'll see a whole load of ownership information here. So in this case, the diagram is owned actually by me, and it's also authored by me. So the author is the person who has the edit rights to the diagram. So they don't have to be the same person, they can be different. But the point is there's a clear point of contact to say who's accountable for the compliance and the performance of this process in the organization. So what we can do in the Elements tool is actually go through an electronic workflow to review and electronically sign off the processes. So we actually start to version control the processes. So this gives us a baseline of the ones that we're going to go live with, ready for GDPR. But then as we make changes in the future, we'll have an audit trail to be able to show the changes, which is really important both for our own understanding, but particularly when the auditor comes and asks to show that you're in control of how you work. So the next part then is around communication. So great, we've got all this stuff, but what about the people out there? Because right now we haven't delivered any benefit until the people in the organization are actually knowing and using these processes. And the great news is actually in terms of training material, we've done it because we've mapped the flows, we've validated them. The how is attached. We understand the data that's linked. So actually the flows themselves are the training materials. But to make it even easier, as well as just having this view of the processes, it's possible to construct other views. So for example, we could have a role-based access. So if I'm a line manager, I want to know what are all the things that I need to do. I don't care about anyone else. Where are the processes that I'm involved in? So here we are. We have the how-to for line managers. So we have, for example, how do I conduct a disciplinary meeting? It's quite interesting that this is the first process. I don't think I'd want to work for Blue Chip if this is their most important one. So how do I manage a flexible working request? How do I recruit a new employee to my team? Actually, this is the one I want. It's how to recruit. So when I click the link, it will take me directly to that process and I'll be able to follow the process through then. So there I am. I can see myself as the line manager. As I mentioned before, the reporting is very good in this tool as well to be able to report activities that have got my role in it. And it's also very simple to be able to search for processes as well. So back to the method. So now what we've done is communicated and trained the users. So the users have got access to the process flows, and guess what? Because of the collaboration functionality, they're actually able to start recording comments, and as an owner I'm going to be proactively encouraging my users to throw rotten fruit at my processes and say this sucks, this is rubbish, we can do better. Fantastic, bring it on, then we can assess it and we can decide what to do. So this is a little bit like almost making our processes open source. Instead of having somebody who's locked in a cupboard and creating them, let's get everyone in the organization to be part of making this happen. I'm not going to go into the scope of making necessary updates to IT systems because it's not really part of what we're doing, although obviously it's a necessary part of the method that we can't get to this stage until we've got IT systems that are compliant. So we can imagine that the compliance gaps that have been identified would need to be rectified. So when we've got people aware of compliant ways to work, we've got data storage and security is compliant, then we've got to the point where we can confidently go live next May. And after that, it's continuous improvement. So owners need to periodically review their flows and information assets to make sure that they're still compliant as well as being efficient. But what will happen as well is that there will be changes. So someone in the organization will say we need to do a business transformation, which is going to impact processes. Or someone's going to say we're going to do an upgrade to an IT system. So how is that going to impact our GDPR compliance? Well, it's fantastic because we now know that if we're going to be playing about with this object candidates for job positions, we've got some fields in here which are classified as personal data. So we've got to be careful, and we know the processes that are related to them. So we can get the right people involved in the business to make sure that we validated that those processes are still okay. And vice versa. If we change a process, then we can see in here that that there are fields that are impacted, so we can get IT involved to make sure we're not going to break anything. So from that point of view, the method is very well supported by having a tool to do this. So back to our agenda. So we've gone through what good looks like, and I've shown you exactly how we could achieve that. I've shared the method that we use and actually gone through some practical examples. So in terms of what you can do now, well, I think the first thing is to make sure your people are trained. You need to make sure that you've got people who really understand how to do this. So good business analysts and facilitators. And you may well have these people in your organization already. So it's something certainly that we can help with by providing training in the Elements tool, for example, and the approach and our method, or you can pick this up and do it yourselves. You certainly need to define your method as well. I've shown you the one that we recommend, and that can easily be tailored to your organization. But then I believe you definitely need a professional system for managing your processes and your data. So the most common one is going to be Excel or Visio or even something like Lucidchart. And don't get me wrong, these are fantastic tools, but really when it comes to wanting to do these things to manage your compliance, make sure you're collaborating, make sure you're well communicated, good management of processes and making sure the processes are improved, you need a professional platform for doing this. So today I've shown you elements.cloud, which is a brilliant platform for doing this. There are other ones as well. Score is very good, a very lightweight but very powerful application. For bigger customers, Tibco Nimbus is very sophisticated. It's used by some big food and pharma companies and banking around managing compliance in their organization. So lastly, I'd love you to make contact with me. If you have any questions, no problem to follow up and ask for more information or just some help how we've done this. I'm very happy to help with that. So you can contact me by my email or on my Twitter account. And you can also log a form on our website if you want to ask for some help. And so I'm going to leave you with that. And I wish you good luck with your GDPR journey. I'd love to hear how you get on. I did promise that for those people who registered for this webcast, we'll be sending out a guide. So that will follow in the coming days. So you should get that before Christmas. A nice Christmas present for you. And other than that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining. It's been really good to share our approach with you. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas and hope to be in contact with some of you in the new year. Take care.